Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the presentation on student financial aid. I'm the Director of Student Financial Aid, Tasneem Salasa. And we'll get started straight into it. On this side, I have Nobby and Zanatemba that is assisting me, so you can post questions in the chat, and they will assist with answering those questions for you as we go along. So firstly, I think it's important to understand that the main source of funding or financial aid at any university is the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Abbreviated, it is known as NSFAS. And so all applications for financial aid must be done via NSFAS on the online system. They actually evaluate the eligibility of applications as per the national rules and guidelines. Now, for first-time university students, eligibility consists of South African citizenship, and they've actually just included from next year applications from people that are permanent residents or students that would be permanent residents of South Africa. They will look at financial need, and so they will determine whether the gross family income is under 350,000 Rand. And most importantly, it is for a first undergraduate qualification. So anybody intending to do a second qualification would not be considered eligible for funding. And then the really important is that it is based on funded programs. So there's many programs of study at the university, but they have specific programs that they will focus on, and primarily these would be for your first undergrad qualification, which is your 3 or 4 year programs. So if people intending to do, for instance, an advanced diploma, those are not funded. From this year, PGCE, which is your teaching diploma, the PGDA, which is your postgrad diploma in accounting, those are not funded either. Or the law post-degree program, which is referred to as the law PO1, that's the code for that. So it's important to understand whether you are enrolling for a funded program or applying for a funded program, that it's basically a first undergraduate qualification, you have citizenship or permanent residency, and that you meet the financial need requirements. So the applications are all online. It is not open, normally not open at the same time that universities open the application process. It is later in the year, but it's important that you make note of what that date is, and so that you do then apply on time. Okay. They also offer an appeal mechanism. So part of the evaluation is to look at the income information the person submits. Sometimes people don't submit their income and their salary information, so they would do a check against a credit bureau for an approximate determination of income, and they also have the ability to check income via SARS. But for instance, you know, your SARS information, for instance, is a year old, and somebody might have retired or become unemployed in the interim, and so therefore that income is not actually correct. They do then provide an appeal mechanism if your application was unsuccessful, and you would need to then provide the necessary information that they require for that appeal to prove that the income is in actual fact within that 350,000 gross income per annum. So the other assistance that is offered then is gap funding, and this is unique to UCT. And this basically is assistance for what is commonly referred to as the missing middle. So those people that earn between 350,000, which is where the NSFAS cutoff is, and 600,000 per annum. So NSFAS would normally provide UCT with the income assessment, but where that information is not readily available from NSFAS, we will actually send out an application to those that are rejected on income above 350,000 and then do an evaluation and assessment for that. The gap funding is based on a sliding scale. So we would offer a tuition bursary on a sliding scale of income from between 40 to 20% of the cost of the tuition, and then a loan based on the accommodation type. So whether you're in res or living at home, there would be then a different loan offer based on that accommodation type. The other funding that is then available is a sibling rebate bursary. And that application would be available on the UCT website. So that's for those that are not NSFAS eligible or not gap funding eligible in terms of the income. But they have 2 siblings studying undergrad at UCT, and the income is between 600,000 per annum and 750,000 per annum. They could apply for a sibling rebate bursary. And the details, obviously, of all the criteria for that is available on the UCT website. So the types of funding basically is financial aid, NSFAS funding. It is a bursary funding that is provided by NSFAS. It covers your tuition costs, which is basically your course fees, accommodation, books, and then a travel allowance if you are actually staying and studying from home. Then, as I said, we have the gap funding for those that are not eligible for NSFAS or financial aid, but the gross family income is between 350,000 and 600,000. And as I said, it is bursary funding on a percentage basis towards tuition fees based on the actual gross income of the family, and then a loan offer to a maximum based on the accommodation type that you're in. Next, we have entrance scholarships that is available at UCT. There's no application required for faculty entrance scholarships, only for sports scholarships. And that too, the application is available on the website. So applicants are automatically considered for the faculty-specific scholarships based on the criteria that the faculty sets every year for that. Faculty will actually inform the applicant whether they're eligible for an entrance scholarship, and that they will make basically the offer of academic offer and the scholarship offer at the same time if you meet that criteria. Faculty entrance scholarships are normally 20,000. There is a few where they will go up to 40,000, but in essence, they are 20,000. The Vice Chancellor's Scholarship is our prestigious 40,000 Rand scholarship for top achieving applicants in various categories. So that would be the 10 top performers in the Western Cape, for instance, would be eligible for the 40,000 BC scholarship, or the winner of the Maths Olympiad that then studies at UCT in the next academic year. Again, the details for each of those is available on the UCT website. So when would you know that you qualify for funding if you were to apply to NSFAS for funding? So when you apply to NSFAS, you have to register on their platform. You could basically create a profile on their My NSFAS platform, and then from there you proceed to do your application. That same platform is where you would find your eligibility outcome. So once they've made that decision, now in 2021 there was a delay in funding decisions, but normally those funding decisions are released roughly when the NSC results are released. But I think really important is for people to understand that late applications are not accepted. Now, normally the NSFAS application platform will open from roughly the 1st of September and will close on the 30th of November. So it's really important to ensure that you follow what is happening on the website, watch media and social media. NSFAS has a Twitter account. So if you go and follow their Twitter account, you will know when the application cycle opens, and that you then apply on time and within that deadline, because if you miss the application, there is no second opportunity to provide that. And if you really need the funding to study, this becomes critical to how you proceed. So it's not just important to apply to study, but to know how you will be funding that studies. And if you need financial aid or financial support, that you meet the deadlines that you require. I think similarly, it's really important to know that sponsors like the likes of Eskom or municipalities or companies that advertise funding, they will always be advertising funding in the year prior to when you intend to study. So in this instance, you intend to study in 2022, applications for 2022 funding will close in 2021. So it is actually crucial that you start to look now already what is available, because from now right through to September, October is when applications will be open and closing for funding. So it's important to actually note that and then ensure that you submit those applications on time. So important also is that NSFAS will assess your application. They could say that you're eligible for funding. And the aspect that I told you earlier as to what is the baseline criteria, example, studying a funded program, is really important, because often people will apply, but they're actually not going to be studying for a funded program. And the NSFAS site will say, yes, you're eligible. But the criteria is that you are eligible, provided that you register at an institution for a funded program. So it's really important that that criteria that you check and know what those are upfront. Okay. So what is the important other aspects around renewal? Now, once you've applied for funding for NSFAS or you get UCT gap funding, renewal is automatic, but there is conditions to that renewal. So you need to be able to say, and that will be checked and submitted obviously to NSFAS, that you have passed 50% of registered courses and that you've met academic progression requirements. So you must remain in good academic standing. okay, that you continue with the same funded program and that you do not exceed the N+ rule. Now, what is the N+1 rule? That is N being the minimum duration of the program. So for instance, if you're doing a Bachelor of Arts, that's a 3-year program. And then +1 means you have 4 years in which to complete that program. So you can understand 50% and academic progression is a serious minimum requirement. If you only pass that every year, you would not be completing the qualification in N+1, and there is no appeal against that rule. So even though there is some baseline minimum criteria, those are not actually going to see you funded to completion if you do not actually perform better than that. I think important too, as I've said earlier, know when all the different agencies close their application cycle, but most important to note is that there is no double dipping. You cannot be funded from 2 sources. So you cannot get NSFAS funding and, for example, funding from a company such as Eskom or a municipality or a other donor. So where that happens, you need to actually inform the financial aid office so that that funding either from NSFAS or you cancel the other sponsors' funding, but you cannot receive funding from 2 sources. The only time that can happen is where the other sponsors, so say you have NSFAS and you have another sponsor, but they're only paying 20,000, like maybe you get a scholarship of 20,000, an entrance scholarship, then you can hold both. But the NSFAS funding will be adjusted. You cannot receive more than the approved cost of study per year. And then just to note, in terms of clubs and societies, these are not covered by any of the funders. And so this is for your own account. So it's really important that you choose your clubs and societies wisely, that you choose something you're really interested in and that you will participate in. And we've seen students register for 5 to 10 clubs and societies, but they're not actually engaging actively in any of those. So when you look at clubs and societies, participate in those that you really have a keen interest in because there is a cost associated with it. Then when you register, we will need a bank account. So if you are funded, we will need a bank account that you need to capture at registration in order for us to pay you allowances such as your book allowance, or your meal allowance or your travel allowance if you're staying at home. So no funding is paid out to any student other than through a bank account, which must be your bank account. Then external bursaries, where can you find information? So we have a financial aid notice board on the website. There's also a bursary booklet, a handbook available on the website where other sponsors will advertise in. And then obviously on the career services portal, on the My Career portal, you can also find bursary opportunities. Now, these are not exhaustive because funders can choose to advertise wherever they wish to. And so trawling the World Wide Web, as they say, is actually really useful because sponsors advertise on very many platforms, some only on one, some on more than one. And this is just a taste of where you could find information, but please, it's not exhaustive and it's worthwhile to actually check. Just in terms of the contact details for the financial aid office, we are in Middle Campus on Kramer Building. Currently, the office is not open. We are still working remotely at UCT. So that's our telephone number, our email address, and then obviously the website where you can find information on the topics that I've covered thus far. So maybe we can go now and look at some of the questions that you have asked and then see if you need any assistance with those. I'm sure that Nobby and Zanatemba has already responded to some of those questions, but maybe where it's open and generic and everybody would like to know, we can then assist. So somebody asked, when is the open date for NSFAS? The opening date for NSFAS, like I've said, it's normally in September and will close at the end of November. But for now, it is not yet open. So it's important to perhaps make a note in your diary of when to apply. I always recommend that you actually do that because they open normally in September. It's before you will write your NSC exams. So make a note of that date and then try and get your application in before you actually start your exams, because students get so busy with their studies and focusing and the stress that goes with writing your final NSC exams that you really don't want to try and do still an application for funding during that time. Try and then do it when they open, get it done, they will evaluate it and you can focus on your actual exams. Okay. So the other aspect of the question was, do I apply for funding before I've been admitted to a university? Absolutely. Like I've said, all the closing dates for funding tends to be in the previous year. The final decision on whether you are successful for that funding will actually be dependent on whether you have passed and met the admission requirements for the university. Some will get an early, a provisional offer, so that if you maintain those results, then you will be admitted into the institution. But it is important that you apply beforehand, and so that if you're eligible for funding, you will know that. And then by the time you get an academic offer to study, once your matric results or your NSC results is released, you know that I can actually go and study that institution. I think the other important aspect about NSFAS is that you only apply once. Right? You don't say there that, and you can put in 2 institution choices, but you will apply to potentially more than 2 institutions. You might, if you're in the Western Cape, apply to CPT, UCT, UWC, and Stellenbosch. If you get into any one of those institutions and you are eligible for NSFAS, the money and the funding will follow where you register for the approved program of study. Okay, one application irrespective of which university, but provided it is a public university. NSFAS does not fund private institutions. Okay, so I'm not sure if there was any more. Okay, then I think an important question that somebody asked was whether at UCT, if you achieve above 80% in subjects, do you qualify for university discounts? No, UCT does not provide tuition discounts, but we do have the scholarship program, where if students meet the faculty-specific criteria for those scholarships, then you would then get that assistance, but we do not have tuition fee discounts. Okay, so I think then the other aspect that is important to understand in answering some of these questions is you don't need to get a conditional offer of acceptance to university in order to apply for NSFAS. Okay, you need to apply for NSFAS even though you are waiting for a decision around academic admission. So, you might get, and I think that's the important aspect, that everybody applies to very many institutions. So you might apply to UCT, like I said, CPT, UWC, and Stellenbosch. And maybe you get an offer from UCT and from Stellenbosch, and maybe you don't get an offer from UWC, or vice versa. You might get an offer to study from UWC and CPUT, and then not get from Stellenbosch or UCT. But the important aspect is that the NSFAS, if you are eligible, the funding will follow wherever you register. It's not subject to a conditional offer. It's subject to you being admitted and registering at an institution for an approved program. Once that has happened, the institution will submit to NSFAS your study costs in line with the national rules and guidelines. So whether it's tuition and residence, or whether it is tuition, a book allowance, and living at home allowance, that will be calculated and submitted to NSFAS, which they will then process and actually allocate the funding to you, and that will then be credited to your fee account. I'm not seeing any other questions that I think would be critical. No, funding is not reduced by taking a gap year. You can have a gap year so you could have done your NSC results exam, last year, and only intend to study now at the university in 2022. That does not affect your application for funding or your application for admission into the institution. The criteria for admission still applies, and the criteria for funding still applies. Okay, so that's also really important. So, like I said, the university scholarships are generally 20,000 Rand from the various faculties. Faculty like science for really top achievers might consider a 40,000 scholarship, but generally they are 20,000. And as I said, the criteria is per faculty. Each faculty will have different criteria, and a lot of that depends on the profile, obviously, of the applicants. So some criteria in some faculties might be slightly higher than in others because of the sheer scale of the competition for admission to study. So it is not a percentage that is offered, but a flat rate that is offered in terms of the scholarship. I'm not seeing other questions. that I think would just be relevant from the moderators to everybody. Just checking. Okay, so then somebody else asked, is there any form of financial aid for international students? No, obviously, as NSFAS does not fund international students, and not specifically from a NSFAS or UCT perspective, but there are sponsors that will advertise funding for international students. For instance, the MasterCard Foundation, and that's by application, will look at funding and accept applications from students that are from Africa. So there are some of those, but you would actually need to be able to check online and, as I said, track to see, and then ideally also check whether there's anything being offered in your own country to study at UCT or a South African university. Somebody's asking about scholarships or bursaries available for first year. So like I said, the university entrance scholarships, those are for consideration for first year students. NSFAS funding is also from first year onwards. Gap funding is also from first year onwards. And then, of course, there's many other funders that will also offer funding from first year. Some may only look at second year onwards because they want to see how the person performs once in their first year academically. But there are very many sources of funding available for students from first year. So yes, for people looking at gap funding, we do require that you actually apply to NSFAS, and where you are then ineligible for NSFAS funding, we will then consider the gap funding. And the reason that it is done in that way is because we don't want a situation where people don't apply for NSFAS and use the gap funding as an alternative. Even though we make every effort to advise people about the application deadlines. So for instance, when you apply to study at UCT, one of the questions will be whether you intend to apply for NSFAS, and you can say yes or no. And for those that say yes, we will actually send out reminder emails to say, NSFAS applications have opened. We'll send the next reminder to say there's 2 months before the application closes. Then we'll say it's a month before application closes. If you haven't applied, please remember to apply. So we do try and remind student applicants about the NSFAS opening and closing date. But I think really if you could put that in your diary and make a note that before I start getting into my exams and study time, or just after I finished my mock exams, the NSFAS application cycle should be open by then. Get that application in and resolve it, and then where you have been ineligible for NSFAS, we will then be able to consider you for UCT gap funding. So somebody's asking, is there a single website where you can find information, all other companies that offer funding? No, as stated in my presentation, there will be stuff on the UCT notice board, bursary notice board. There will be some advertised in our handbook. There will be some advertised via the Career Services Portable, and then some will use all of the other bursary platforms that is available on the website. So it's really important that you go into the search button in Google and say, what bursary funding is available for students intending to study engineering, for instance, and then engineering stuff will come up for all of the various platforms where these are advertised. So definitely you do need to do the search because there is no one source of information for external funding. So UCT will provide you with some, but again, importantly, it is not the only source of funding that is available out there. So somebody's asking particularly about BA Fine Art, NSFAS, UCT gap funding based on that eligibility. And then again, you would need to look at what is available on the website. If I look at, say, Fine Art, you're often going to find that that is something that is, sorry, sponsored by trusts, bursary trusts, more than you would get company funding for something like fine art, because most companies aren't going to employ people in a particular career field around, say, fine art. So they would tend to be funded more by trusts, people that have left money behind in an estate to assist because they had such a passion for the arts. So again, you really do need to go and search the web to see where are those options for all of the different types of funding. Yes, you must reapply for NSFAS funding if you've taken a gap year. So if you wrote your NSC in 2020, you were eligible for NSFAS, but you decided not to study in 2021, but rather to study in 2022, you must reapply. Okay, that application does not hold all the way through. You must reapply. And NSFAS is for SA citizens and permanent residents of South Africa. So that was just another question. But I think the gap year thing is really important, because often people will think, oh, but I did apply and I'm eligible, and that it will stay there. No, basically all of those old applications for people that didn't register, they kind of almost in essence wipe it out of the system, for want of a better word. So your data will not be there for the next academic year. You actually do need to apply again and be eligible again for in terms of the criteria. Okay. So I think we've come to the end of our session. I hope that you found that helpful. Remember, if you need any more information, please do visit the financial aid website on the UCT website. If you go to the UCT website, just type in financial aid and our details will come up. In there, it will give you information on how NSFAS is funding, gap funding, the sibling rebate funding, scholarships, Vice Chancellor scholarship, but it will also provide you with our contact details in case you have any other information that you want to know, or that you want to ask us something more direct that is specific to yourself. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I hope that it was useful and helpful, and that you enjoy the day further in the rest of the information being provided around UCT Open Day for admission for 2021. And we look forward to welcome you to UCT next year, and study hard, stay focused despite the COVID, and all the luck for your final exams. Thank you very much. All the best. Bye.